This video is all about the door locks on a Mercedes R107. We've already done a full video on the boot lock, how to disassemble and fix that. So we'll be primarily concentrating on the door handles, the barrels within the door handles, the difference between the later door handles and the earlier ones, what to do if your key fits in there but won't turn, what to do if your lock isn't automatically springing back. And we'll also be touching on the ignition barrel, how to disassemble one of those should you need to do so. The problem I have is that this key sometimes turns but sometimes catches, and it only turns that way. It doesn't turn back. So what we're going to have to do is take that barrel out and have a look and see what's going on. And in order to get the barrel out, all you need to do is undo that screw. Now, in the first instance, don't undo the screw all the way, because when you press on that screw with your thumb, you should see this here move. Now, I've had this barrel out before, and it comes in and out relatively easily. What you may find if your barrel has been stuck in there for 50 years, that when you take that screw out, nothing happens. So my advice would be don't take it out all the way, and then use a little wooden mallet or a screwdriver bit or something like that and tap on the end of that. Don't ever be tempted to tap on that screw directly. You will end up flattening the head at best, and at worst, you will damage the threads inside there. So once you've got a little bit of movement there, keep tapping with a wooden chopstick or something like that. You'll have to take this out completely then. And this screw here has a little spring washer on it. When you take that off, you may find the whole thing comes to pieces. This crescent shape here is keyed on the bottom. It only goes on one way, and you'll notice that they are also marked left and right. And if you try and put the wrong handles on the wrong door, your door locks won't work. This spring here, you have to wind it round, and it hooks on over this little piece here. And what you will find on some cars is, or on some locks, is that this piece here is broken. So if you put your key in the lock and you turn it, and it doesn't automatically spring back, either that spring is broken or missing, or this piece here has broken off. It is very, very important once you've taken that screw out that you don't simply take the barrel out. Otherwise, all the little wafers that basically determine which key is going to fit the lock will spring out, and you'll never get them back in the right place again. So either take the barrel out with the key in like this, in which case the wafers can't spring out, or turn the lock vertically and take the barrel out that way. Now, the wafers may still spring out, but the chances are, if your lock is old, that the wafers will actually be stuck in there and not spring out. So let me just give you an example of that. If you take this out very slowly, take it really slowly, so if a wafer does spring out, you know exactly where it's coming from. And you can see here, those little spring-loaded wafers, these little wafers here, are coming out, but they're not falling out. The other thing to note is that this barrel only goes into the lock in one orientation. You can't turn that 180 degrees simply because they have this little key on here. Just very quickly going to turn this upside down. It doesn't have the key on the other side. Now, on this particular lock, you will notice that there are some wafers missing, and often, if for some reason you can't turn the lock because one wafer is sticking up and stopping it happening, you can simply take that wafer out. These wafers simply just pull out like so, and they're spring-loaded in there. You may find that if your key isn't turning at all, that these are completely gummed up. And what often happens over the years is people do crazy things like spray WD-40 inside a lock to try and lubricate it. But that's about the worst thing you can do, because the whole thing gums up over the years. This wears down into a powder, mixes with the WD-40, produces a nice grinding paste, and a glue-like substance gets caught in here, and these things will no longer move freely. So if you need to lubricate the lock, either use graphite powder or use some specialist lock lubricant like the WD-40 dry spray that they do. I'm going to just show you what a lock looks like or might look like that hasn't ever been apart. Unfortunately, the locks or the door handles from later cars are not interchangeable with door handles from earlier cars. They look almost identical, apart from the shape of the key is different. This key here is from our 1975 SL. It's a different type of key than the key that goes in these locks. That's the first difference. The barrels themselves are different, and you might think, oh, well, that's no problem, I can just change a barrel, because the chrome on these locks is in much better condition than the chrome on these locks. And I was hoping just to swap the barrels over and use these locks on the car that we're doing, but that unfortunately is not going to be possible, because when you take that barrel out, there's actually a V-shaped groove in there, which there isn't on these, and the wafers are a different size and shape as well, so you cannot simply swap a later door handle with an earlier door handle unless you want to swap all the keys, etc. as well. One thing you'll also find on many locks, these locks are a good example, is that there are various bits broken off. And that's normally because people don't bother ever lubricating the lock, taking off and lubricating. So for example, there is a bit broken off here, and there's also a bit broken off here. If you look at this lock here, you can see that there should be two pieces on this side, and on this side there should be one piece, and here you can see those are missing. Here is a lock that we've never had apart before, and when you pull the handle, it's very, very slow in springing back. There are two things or three things that help this spring back. One is the spring in there. Two is a spring in there. If either of those springs are broken or damaged, that could be the problem. Or the third thing is just simply a lack of lubricant, which is the issue with this particular lock. And in order to get around that, what you need to do is take the handle off and clean out all of this gunk and lubricate it either with grease or silicone or something like that. Remember, lubricating the actual moving parts of the lock is not the same as lubricating the barrel itself. For the barrel, you're going to need graphite powder or a specialist lock lubricant, but for these moving parts here, you can use a little bit of grease or silicone spray. So let's just try taking this screw out here. Once again, we'll take it out partially and see if there's any movement when we push. Okay, there's a little bit of movement there, so we can take this screw all the way out. Bearing in mind, when you do that, 9 times out of 10, this little crescent will come flying off. You can see just how much gunk there is. Now, you should then be able to use a chopstick. Don't use a screwdriver like that, because you'll damage the threads, to get this out. Now, I happen to know that these are completely gummed up and not going to come springing out. But if you did this at home and you took the lock out, holding it horizontally like that, and all those wafers fell out, you would curse yourself forever. So remember to hold the lock up vertically like that when you take it out. I don't happen to have a key for this lock, so I can't insert the key. This is what you are likely to find, and this here is very, very common and symptomatic of a lock that has been lubricated. Let's just see if we can zoom in on this. Lubricated with something like WD-40. You get this really sticky residue here, and that is basically stopping all of these wafers from springing up and down. So when you push the wafers down, they should automatically spring up, which they're not on this lock. So if this was your lock, you would have to very carefully take out each wafer, line them up, take a photograph, make sure you don't muck it up, and then clean each one with a solvent. You could use something like WD-40 to clean the wafers, but as I say, to lubricate them, you need to use graphite powder. Now, the shape of these wafers, as I mentioned, is different from the shape of the earlier style of wafer. There's an extra notch in there that does not exist. I was hoping to be able to use the wafers from the later locks on to repair my lock, but that's not going to be possible. Okay. On these later locks, I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but there is a notch running all the way through here, a V-shaped notch. See how much gunk is in this lock, it's ridiculous. There's a V-shaped notch running all the way through it, which you don't have on the earlier locks, which is another reason why they're not simply interchangeable. But if you were trying to fix your own lock, you'd have to clear all of that gunk out really thoroughly, either with a bristled brush with brake cleaner or something like that. Dry it all off thoroughly and then lubricate it with graphite powder or specialist dry lock lube. On the later wafers, they have little numbers on, which makes it relatively easy to put the lock back together. You just need to note down the numbers and the order they come in. Whereas on the earlier wafers here, you can see that there are no numbers on the wafer, or at least if there ever were, they've long since rubbed off. Another difference between the later and the earlier door handles is, whilst these bits look identical, the wafers are actually thicker on later cars than on earlier cars, so you wouldn't be able to interchange these because the wafers wouldn't fit into the little holes because they're slightly different widths. When you come to put this spring back in here, you need to make sure one of them is hooked on that side like that, and then you need to take this other piece and hook it on the other side like that. And it is this spring that determines whether or not your key will spring back and forwards in the lock. So if that little piece of metal is broken, unfortunately your key will still work, but it just won't spring back nicely. The only way I'm able to get this barrel to turn in this lock is by taking out 3 of the wafers. And once you take out 3 of the wafers, the key turns both ways. And the reason I can't have those wafers in is because they protrude ever so slightly, just a fraction of a millimeter, maybe because the key is a little bit worn. So I'm just going to keep those 3 wafers out and put the lock back together, and that should sort our problem out. We managed to get this lock back together. It now turns in both directions and the key springs back as it should. And this is ready to go back on the car. Unfortunately, the chrome is not in the best condition, and I had hoped to use these handles here, but as I mentioned, they're not interchangeable, which is a shame. This door handle is ready to go back on the car. There's nothing special about putting the door handles on the car. All you need to remember or realise is that the door card needs to be off and the waterproof membrane needs to be off. There are 2 screws at the front here that hold the door handle on, and 1 screw at the back here. You don't need to take that back screw out all the way because that slides in. When you come to put the door handle in, sometimes it's easier just to open the door slightly so you can get that part in, and the door handle should just slide forward like that. And then if you're lucky, these screws here will align. Can be quite tricky to get those screws in sometimes. My advice would be to put one of those in first, just loosely, and then come back, and you'll need to put a screwdriver through this hole here. To do that rear screw up, you need a long Phillips screwdriver, and then you should just be able to do that screw up. It's difficult with one hand. It works perfectly in here now. You can see when I lock the door now, that now locks and unlocks, which is perfect. I'm just going to finish the video very quickly by showing you how to get one of these ignition barrel casings off. This here is the ignition lock from our parts car, and somebody had previously drilled it out, and we needed to take this to pieces just to see if we could use any of the wafers to fix our locks, and I struggled. So this is how you do it. In order to get this casing off the ignition, you need to insert the lock, and the key should start at position 0, and you need to turn it till it's at position 1. And when the lock is at position 1, you should find that this casing here just comes off, and that's because this here is spring loaded. And the spring loading only works when the key is in that position. If you turn the key slightly, this will no longer push down. I'll say this will no longer push down, and you won't be able to get this off. Once you've got the chrome casing off, the actual barrel is held in with a steel clip like this. It's not a circlip, it's just a clip that you need to use a screwdriver to pry it off, and then this will just push out. But once again, you need to be very careful when you take this out, that you orientate the lock the key position horizontally, so when you take this out, all the wafers don't fly out. If you have the lock vertically like that, i.e. with this button up, when you take the barrel out, all the wafers will drop out. I'm going to finish this video here. We are off to Australia for a few weeks for Christmas. And if there's anyone out in Australia that needs any obscure Mercedes parts, let me know and I'll bring them over. But if you enjoy these videos or if they're useful to you, drop us a comment and let us know, because sometimes it is very lonely working in a cold garage filming videos like this, and every now and again somebody writes a video and says thanks, that really helped me, and it makes a huge difference. So please do take time to give us a thumbs up, drop us a comment, and if you are watching to the end, thank you very much for all your support and have a wonderful Christmas.